Archie's gonna read today, maybe. Here it goes. Amelia Bedelia Goes Wild, Chapter 6, Walked Like a Shuck. After lunch, Mrs. Shuck began talking about endangered animals. Amelia Bedelia took a big risk by peeking at her notebook at the list she had made of cool animals for her zoo. She still felt bad about turning down Roger's deer head. She knew that zoologists and scientists often studied stuffed animals from long ago. Then she remembered that last year Roger had brought a beautiful lizard for show and tell. It was green with gold spots and bright blue lines around its eyelids. Amelia Bedelia made sure that Miss Shuck wasn't looking and wrote Roger a note. Dear Roger, please bring your amazing lizard over to my house. I'll put it in my zoo. Sorry about the deer. Amelia Bedelia. She folded the note into a tiny square, wrote Roger on the outside, and passed it to Penny, just as Mrs. Shuck looked up. Beep! Very quietly and very carefully, the note was passed from student to student until it reached Roger. Mrs. Shuck was talking about polar bears when Amelia Bedelia got her answer. In a few years, said Mrs. Shuck, polar bears might go extinct. No, I don't believe it, blurted out Amelia Bedelia. The entire class stared at her. You disagree, Amelia Bedelia? Asked Mrs. Shuck. What if an animal disappears? That's okay, said Amelia Bedelia. If their coats and skins let them blend in, that protects them. You're getting ahead of us, said Mrs. Shuck. We'll talk about natural camouflage next. What Amelia Bedelia did not believe was the answer of her note. Amelia Bedelia, my lizard was a gecko named George. He died, George. Amelia Bedelia wrote back, George, I'm sorry. Amelia Bedelia. When Mrs. Shuck turned toward the board, Amelia Bedelia held out the note to Penny, but Penny didn't take it. Amelia Bedelia looked at her. Beep! Penny was staring straight ahead, ignoring Amelia Bedelia and the note. Beep! Amelia Bedelia had forgotten the first rule of passing a note at school. Never take your eyes off the teacher. Beep! But it was too late. Amelia Bedelia looked up at Mrs. Shuck and froze like a baby bunny in an open field. The hawk came swooping down the aisle, gleaming red talons, plucked the note out of Amelia Bedelia's hand. I'll take this, young lady, and I'll see you after school. Looking at the rest of the class, she added, and if I hear one more beep out of anyone while I'm teaching, you will join Amelia Bedelia. Amelia Bedelia, Mrs. Shuck said at the end of the day, I am so disappointed. You're usually so considerate. You pay attention, you ask good questions. Now you're drawing plans for a zoo and passing notes. After I missed the trip to the zoo, said Amelia Bedelia, I just wanted to do something fun with my class and animals. Tears welled up in Amelia Bedelia's eyes. I see, said Mrs. Shuck. How's it going? Are you making progress? Amelia Bedelia thought for a few seconds. Then she said, pretty good, but it isn't easy to make an interesting zoo, especially if you can't have the type of animals that can eat you. Mrs. Shuck laughed, and Amelia Bedelia smiled back. You know, said Mrs. Shuck, I have been to a lot of zoos all over the world, and I've seen thousands of animals. I'd love that, said Amelia Bedelia. It's fun to see them, said Mrs. Shuck, and I've always wondered what it's like to be them. That's more interesting, said Amelia Bedelia. Mrs. Shuck nodded. Pay more attention in class and you might get an idea for your zoo, she added. She handed the note back to Amelia Bedelia. I promise, said Amelia Bedelia. In my class, said Mrs. Shuck, you can keep your head in the clouds as long as your feet are on the ground. Getting in trouble and staying after school meant that Amelia Bedelia missed her bus, so her feet were definitely on the ground. As she waited on the bench out front for her mother to pick her up, she thought about the zoo, her friends, and what Mrs. Shuck had said. She looked up at the sky. She could never look at clouds without seeing animals in them. Today she spotted an entire zoo overhead. A hippopotamus drifted by a rhinoceros chasing a cheetah away from a gazelle. They raced around a huge cloud that didn't have much shape. It was round on top and flat on the bottom, like a giant tortoise, with its head and legs stuck inside its shell. No, wait a second. Amelia Bedelia couldn't believe it. It was a pie in the sky. She pointed at it, but no one was around to share it with her. Suddenly, it changed into a lizard and scampered away. If there can be pie in the sky, said Amelia Bedelia, then there can be a zoo in my backyard. Chapter 7. Leaping Lizards, a Glacial Gecko. When Amelia Bedelia finally got home, Roger was already waiting. Sitting on the doorstep next to him was a plastic cooler. You didn't have to bring your own refreshments, said Amelia Bedelia. We have cold drinks. Amelia Bedelia's right, said her mother, laughing. I'll go make you some lemonade. Roger stared at Amelia Bedelia and patted the top of the cooler. Georgie is in here, he whispered. Amelia Bedelia felt creeped out and curious. Why would Roger bring a dead gecko over to her house? Don't worry, said Roger. Georgie doesn't stink. He's frozen solid. Then he told Amelia Bedelia how his little brother had let Georgie out of his terrarium to show to some friends. Georgie had disappeared, and they found him flattened under a sofa cushion. It was winter, and the ground was too frozen to bury him, so they put him in a plastic bag and stuck him in the freezer until the ground thawed and he could have a proper burial. Georgie died 5 months ago, said Roger. I have pretty much forgotten about him until I got your note. Would you like to see him? Amelia Bedelia nodded. So Roger opened the cooler, pushed aside the ice pack, and held up the gecko. Georgie was in a plastic bag. He was flattened out like he had been run over. Amelia Bedelia was fascinated. She didn't notice Clay coming up the walk. Cool, he said. What's that? It's more than cool, said Amelia Bedelia. It's frozen. It's Georgie, said Roger. I never got a chance to bury him. He's a gold dust day gecko from Madagascar. Amelia Bedelia didn't know what to do. She had imagined having a zoo, not a museum. This is amazing, said Clay. We can make a sign that says he's a reptile and that even though the word dinosaur means terrible lizard, he's not a dinosaur. We can say Georgie is an ancient lizard that fell into a glacier and was perfectly preserved to this very day. We can write that he liked to eat all kinds of insects and bugs, said Roger. Even the flu, said Amelia Bedelia, because that would be great. Let's freeze him in a block of ice, said Clay. He'll be the main attraction. I'll put him in our bird bath, said Amelia Bedelia. She was beginning to see the possibilities in the ideas. Georgie will be on a pedestal, and it can hold the melting water. Roger looked relief. Once he thaws out, we can bury him. Absolutely, said Amelia Bedelia. Amelia Bedelia, Clay, and Roger sneaked Georgie into the kitchen. They were about to fill a plastic bag with water when they heard Amelia Bedelia's mother coming. They released it and tucked it into the back of the freezer behind a bag of frozen peas. That night, everything for dinner was fresh, so the freezer door stayed shut. Amelia Bedelia had already told her mother why she had to stay late at school, but during dessert she told her father too. You want to build a zoo? Asked her father. With real animals? Just pets, she replied. Like finally, and Joy has a rabbit and Penny has a mouse. Lots of kids in my class have pets, plus we'll probably use some stuffed animals. You started to tell me this the other day, didn't you? So that's why the snake was in our backyard, said her mother. A snake in our backyard? Said Amelia Bedelia's father. Forget it. Oh, Daddy, please, said Amelia Bedelia. It's a really big idea. We'll have games and rides, too. Sweetie, he said, building a zoo is complicated. It would be different if you'd done some planning. Amelia Bedelia excused herself and ran to her bedroom. She returned with her notebook. She showed her parents the plan for the zoo. It included everything from the rope swing entrance to the birdbath glacier display. All of the animals and exhibits were organized into habitats. Amelia Bedelia's parents looked at the map, at each other, and then at Amelia Bedelia. So, said her father, smiling, when I fell into your wading pool, it was actually a crocodile-infested river? Uh-huh, said Amelia Bedelia. Sorry. And my herb garden will be home to a big cat? Said her mother. Yep, but it never moves, said Amelia Bedelia. It won't bother anything. Her father shrugged. Looks harmless enough, I suppose. And you did a great job of planning, said her mother. Let us sleep on it, and we'll let you know in the morning. Amelia Bedelia handed her notebook to her mother. Just don't sleep on it too much, she said. If it gets wrinkled, I'll have to do it over. Amelia Bedelia put on her pajamas and kissed her parents goodnight. She lay in bed looking at The sweet squirrel monkey perched on her windowsill. She loved her gift, and she felt really lucky to have such good friends at school. She could just see the reflection of the monkey in the glass. Two monkeys are better than one, she thought. She was about to turn off her lamp when she noticed that her monkey had lost its reflection. That's odd, she thought. Then Amelia Bedelia's own animal instincts kicked in. She got out of bed and rummaged through her backpack. Where was that extra banana her mother always packs? Got it! She raised the window and set the banana on the ledge. Leaves rustled in a nearby tree, and she closed the window. Back to bed, Amelia Bedelia whispered, "Good night, little monkey."